When two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers, an African proverb. I believe this proverb relates to our criminal justice system and the fact that the people who lobby and create policy create undue suffering. When I originally heard about the Indianapolis Reentry Educational Facility, or IREF, it was at Decision Day last spring, and to be honest, I had no real thoughts about the idea. James had sold me on the concept of bridge, and I believed IREF was simply just a means to an end, so I could begin college and start off on the right foot. When walking into IREF, I knew how the experience would give us a real-world understanding that would go hand in hand with what we'd learn in our criminal justice class. But for the first few visits, I couldn't get past a mode of neutralism. I couldn't figure out where I stood. But with each visit and every article I read pertaining to our criminal justice system, I started to develop a feeling past neutral. What really pushed me past my initial feelings was Cole's speech about hating the crime and loving the criminal. His speech was filled with words that were pretty unknown by us, or as Cole could say, unascertained or exotic. But he really had me thinking about policies and corrections in America. In the beginning, I believed I didn't want a thing to do with corrections, but with each visit to IREF and the literature I read, I began to create a stance for myself. I realized I wanted to stop being reactive with dealing with the current system and be proactive. With every article I read and every lecture I sat through with Garcia, I saw how it played out in the real world. When we learned about implicit biases, the gears in my head began to move. I could see how not everything we see, especially in our media today, is black and white, but can be various shades of gray. I began to see how the biases themselves weren't a negative, but how left unchecked could cause serious damage. We saw it with the war on drugs in the 80s, and how though crack and cocaine were virtually the same thing, their sentences for each were far different. In working with Toastmasters, I realized I could relate to just about anyone. One of my initial fears or apprehensions was that I believed I wouldn't be able to relate to anyone at IREF. I felt as if I lacked that common ground. But Toastmasters made me feel comfortable and let me open up, and I realized I could relate through a speech if I lacked that common ground. Whenever we went to Toastmasters, we could see how their meetings had certain procedures to be followed, and how prepared they were, which gave off to me a sense of work ethic which I admired. Toastmasters helps the residents. The skills they learn there will help them when they leave IREF. Toastmasters teaches them to be professional, to expand their vocabularies, and to be very well spoken. These three skills for any person is needed to be successful, but for the residents, these three skills when looking for a job could help push past the negative perceptions that are associated with ex-cons. The ethic we saw at Toastmasters, I believe, Professor Thedwell wanted us to have when we prepared and gave our speeches, and though it took me a while, I started to see the importance of R110. Professor Thedwell, and being exact in what she wanted from us, made me actually try, and I finally learned how to write a decent outline, which I am very thankful for. And though it took me to the fourth speech to become confident in what I had to say, I believe better late than never. Toastmasters and R110 also helped to professionalize us because we had to dress for success for every speech we delivered and every time we stepped foot into IREF. Before IREF, prisoners in prisons were an out-of-sight, out-of-mind complex for me. But going to IREF, I could no longer be oblivious to a part of a system that is very important to our society. Because of this experience, I began to be shaped into a different person. I learned a lot from IREF, but one of the biggest was it helped shape my 10 to 15 year plan. Like I said, I wanted nothing to do when it came to corrections before IREF, but now I want to create new policy. I want to get rid of private prisons and the profiteering of prisoners, and this is an experience that I am thankful for. I also like how this experience will give me an edge compared to other freshmen in our field because I can use this for my resume and my LinkedIn. After a semester of going to IREF, I realize now that this wasn't a means to an end, and I am very grateful for the opportunity. I went from not having any thoughts about criminals and the prison system to wanting to make a change. We are in a dire time for change. Change is difficult, but not changing is fatal.